Well, tonight I'm going to be talking about the new atheists and considering whether they've got anything actually new to say. But who are they? Well, of course, most people have heard of Richard Dawkins now, zoologist from Oxford University and a colleague of mine. There's Christopher Hitchens, a Marxist from the United States. Sam Harris from the United States. Daniel Dennett, a philosopher who was a pupil with me of Gilbert Ryle in Oxford many years ago. And those are some of the names of the new atheists who have really propagated a very virulent form of atheism, which is more evangelical than any Christians managed to be, and has founded a website which calls them the Brights. They are the Brights, and we, people like me, are the Dims, so I just have to put up with that, really. What is new about these new atheists? Atheism is actually not very new. I mean, there have always been atheists in the world, but no philosopher of any note has ever been an atheist until Nietzsche. Thomas Hobbes possibly, but he didn't write about metaphysics. So all the classical philosophers, Plato, Aristotle, Leibniz, Spinoza, Descartes, Kant, Hegel, the whole canon of Western philosophy has been theistic, has taken the most rational view of the universe to be one which sees the universe as created by an intelligent creator, by God. Nietzsche wasn't, I think, a great philosopher. He was a great aphorist, and he, of course, did say God is dead. But the new atheism has only got going with a particular interpretation of modern science. It's a peculiar interpretation, and tonight I shall argue it's already obsolete as an interpretation of science. And it's interesting that most people who claim that science is atheistic are not physicists or mathematicians. They're zoologists, as Richard Dawkins is, or biologists. In other words, they deal with dirty stuff in laboratories that make funny smells, and they don't concern themselves with the real, tough, ultimate matter of the universe as physicists do. I shall elaborate on that a little bit further. But let me quote one person, Richard Lewontin from the United States, who says this: we, I don't know who the we is, it's him and his friends really, we take the side of science because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Moreover, that commitment is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. That statement was made by Lewontin, who is a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, in a book review, but still, he presumably meant it. So science has a prior commitment to materialism, does it? That's the question I want to consider. And I want to argue that actually modern science, far from having a commitment to materialism, undermines materialism comprehensively. But of course not in biology, which is not really concerned with questions like that, but in physics, where the notion of matter has become extremely obscure. Physicists wouldn't use the word matter, in fact. They would prefer to use the word energy. Matter is one possible form of energy, as we know from the one equation that everybody knows, E equals mc squared. So matter is actually interchangeable with energy, and there are many other forms of energy. And most physicists these days agree there are lots of immaterial things. Let me give you one example. Supposing you ask the question, as Stephen Hawking does, for example, how did the universe begin? What accounts for the Big Bang 13.7 thousand million years ago? That's when the universe began. It was very, very small, infinite density, infinite mass, and it exploded, expanded into the universe we now have over that period of time. But it's a proper question in science. How can we explain how it began? If you can't explain it, then science has come to an end. You say, here's something we just can't explain in science. And of course, physicists don't like saying that. They want to say, oh, there must be some sort of explanation. So what they often do is to say, well, there must be some laws, quantum laws, laws of quantum reality, from which the universe originated. And these laws must be beyond space and time. And that's because this universe, of course, is space and time. Space and time is what's in this universe. We live in space and time now. But if you're looking at the early universe, at the regime of the Big Bang, you're talking about something beyond space and time. Now, this is very intriguing. And a lot of physicists would say, well, what we have to see is that there are worlds beyond this. There are things beyond this universe. That is, there are things beyond space and time. And that reality beyond space and time is probably mathematical in its nature. I mean, there are quantum laws. One popular physical explanation for this is to say, well, there are energies like gravitational energy, which pulls things together, and inflationary energy, which pushes things apart. And in the regime before this universe began, I shouldn't really say before, but I can't think of any other word to use, because, of course, there wasn't a before this universe began, because when this universe began, that was the beginning of time. Okay? So there's no before. I mean, there's nothing before the beginning of time. But anyway, apart from the beginning of time, beyond time altogether, there are these balancing energies, which some physicists call a quantum vacuum. Right? And you say this is a quantum phenomena in their simplest possible state, the vacuum state. So this may not make any sense to you at all, but it's what physicists talk about. Whether it does make sense, I don't know. But let's suppose it does make sense. The point is this. Physicists are talking about things beyond space and time. Now, what we call natural, the natural world, is this space-time world. That's the natural world with things in it. And anything beyond the natural world is, of course, supernatural. It's beyond this world of space and time. And these days, physicists regularly talk about the supernatural. That is, they talk about things beyond space and time, from which space and time originated. Not only that, they talk about it as something elegant and beautiful. Now, again, if you're not a mathematician, you may not agree that mathematics can be elegant and beautiful, but all mathematicians will agree there's a big difference between a beautiful piece of mathematics and an ugly piece of mathematics, and that's what's really important when you do maths. So that world beyond space and time is a world of beauty and elegance and immensely intricate intelligibility. It can be understood. It works in a rational sort of way. Now, this is very interesting because it means that the best science now, which is, of course, quantum physics, the best science now talks about the supernatural and a world beyond space and time from which space and time originate. And it talks about the supernatural as rational, as intelligible, as beautiful, and as elegant. And that can hardly fail to remind me and people like me of that first statement in St. John's Gospel that in the beginning was reason, intelligibility, logos, translated into English often as the word, but it really means something more like intellect or rationality. And the word was with God. The word was God. So in a way, the Christian faith has been saying since it started that this world is a rational structure, that space and time are not self-explanatory, that they need to be explained by something beyond space and time. And that beyond is rational, it is intelligible, it is beautiful. So science and faith come very close together. It is not true at all that science is opposed to faith. The point is people like Richard Dawkins don't deal with these questions because they're dealing with evolution, with biology, and they're concerned with historical things that have happened. But if you probe really deep down into the nature of this universe, you might find that you're driven beyond this universe of space and time into the supernatural. Now, scientists, I confess, hate the word supernatural because they think supernatural means ghosts and spirits and queer goings-on of various sorts. But actually, it's strictly true that the regime, the multiverse, that which exists beyond this space-time, is supernatural. And if it has a mathematical quality, well, that's important. And there's something else about it, too. It's not only elegant and beautiful, it seems to have the nature of consciousness, and that is very intriguing. Now, if you talk to any quantum physicist as you walk down the street in Perth, you might ask them, well, is consciousness an ultimate element of reality? And you may be surprised to know that they will say, even if they don't think so, they will say, many of my colleagues in physics think it is. And let me just explain in brief why that is true. Why is consciousness ultimate in reality? Because the reason I'm talking about this is because God is a consciousness. God is a supreme consciousness. God knows. God intends. And so God is conscious, clearly. And the question is that regime beyond this universe, beyond space and time, conscious in any sense? Would that make any sense? And the reason it would is this. For a quantum physicist, What is an electron? Most of you will have done some physics in school anyway, and you will know that an electron, well, will you know what an electron is? Probably not. Because what we get taught in schools about electrons is they're like little planets which circle in orbits around the nucleus, the center of an atom. So they're like little planets, they're solid things which have a particular place and location and move at a particular speed. Well, let me tell you, that is false. That is simply not true. That's for school kids. They can more or less, it's a bit like religion. You tell people simple things because they can't understand complicated things, all right? But it all goes wrong if you think that the simple things you've been told are the true things. What you've got to see is the simple things are not the true things. They're just ways in which most of us can understand them. But actually, a physicist is able to understand electrons much better. And a physicist, I've asked plenty of physicists about this, and they all tell me the same thing. It doesn't make any sense, but here goes. An electron is a probability wave in Hilbert space. What is Hilbert space? Well, it's logical space. It's a space of all logically possible states of affairs. It's not an actual space like this one, but it's a state of possibilities, a space of possibilities. What is a probability wave? Well, you know what a wave is. It goes like that. That's the wave. But a probability wave isn't an actual wave. It's a wave of probability. It's in Hilbert space. It's in conceptual space. And what a probability wave does is it tells you that if you take the square of the amplitude, how big it is that way, if you take the square of the amplitude of a probability wave, you get the probability of finding an electron at a particular location if you carry out a specific experiment. Now, what's the point of all this? The point of all this is to say reality is nothing like any of us can imagine. If you try to say, what is reality really like? It's not made of little hard balls bumping into one another. That's obsolete science. That is absolutely false. Nobody believes that in physics anymore. Those little hard balls have collapsed. They've all gone. They don't bump into each other. So where are they? Well, you can't say. In fact, let me quote John von Neumann, one of the greatest quantum physicists. All elements of reality are elements of consciousness. There's consciousness coming in. So how does that happen? Well, these probability waves in Hilbert space collapse. The wave function collapses into the perception of an object when, and only when, it is observed. Precisely when it's measured, but of course the measurement is ready to be observed at some future time. And there's the intriguing thing about modern physics, that this whole world appears only to be the way it is when we look at it. In fact, this is the view which was held by one of the, in my view, the greatest bishops of the Anglican Church, Bishop Berkeley, many years ago. I walk over Bishop Berkeley every day when I'm in Oxford. He's buried in Christ Church Cathedral, and every time I walk over him, I think, oh, yes, well, he's not really there. Unless I look at him. And, of course, that was Berkeley's view. Things only exist when you look at them. Now, you may think this is absurd, but let me try and make it less absurd. We're all sitting here in this cathedral, and we've all got different coloured clothes on, so we know there are lots of colours in this cathedral. Now, I asked you the question that Bishop Berkeley asked, what would things look like if we weren't looking at them? And you might feel, well, they look like what they look like when we are looking at them. The first point is, how do you know? How do you know what things look like when you're not looking at them? Well, close your eyes, then you open them very quickly just to see what they're like. No, it doesn't work, because you're still only seeing them when you look at them. Are they like what they look like when you look at them, when you're not looking at them? I can tell you, certainly not. Because all the colors that you see are actually not existent in the physical world. Things don't have color. Colors in the physical world are electromagnetic waves, which, when, and only when, they hit the cones of your eyes and are transmitted by electrical impulses to your visual cortex, then color begins to exist. Some animals, lots of animals, don't see in color at all. Some people are colorblind. We see different colors. So color is a function of the mind. And the mind coming into contact with electromagnetic waves through the medium of the eyes and the brain, the visual cortex, through that medium, the mind sees a world of colors, but those colors aren't really there. They're there when you look at them, but when you don't look at them, what you've got are electromagnetic waves. They're those waves again. What sort of existence do waves have? You don't actually see them. So quantum physicists take this even further, and they say not only do colors only exist when you see them, the whole world only exists when you see it. That world of probability waves in Hilbert space collapses into ordinary physical objects only when it is observed by consciousness. We can't even imagine what it's like when we're not observing it. We all look like solid bodies. Here we are, solid bodies made of solid stuff. We bump into one another. That's solid enough. But actually, any physicist will tell you when actually all of us are almost entirely empty space. Right? There's some atoms, quite a lot of atoms in there, but they're very, very small. Most of us is empty space. So why don't we go through each other? Well, we might, but it doesn't seem as though we do. To us, things look solid. But again, that's what they look like. So the lesson from physics is that Plato, that ancient old Greek, was right after all. The world that we see and touch and feel and think we live in is a world of appearances. It's not the world of reality. It's the world as it appears to people with our sense organs and our brains, the world seen through that lens of human bodies. But the world is not like that at all. And things, of course, in physics have got to the stage now where people can hardly understand, well, even physicists can hardly understand what's going on, but some friends of mine in Oxford are making quantum computers. Now, you've probably heard about quantum computers, but just think what they are. If you have an ordinary computer, it will do calculations in this space and time. Your computer has a place, it's in space and time, there it is. It does its calculations in space and time. A quantum computer would do calculations in 2 or 3 different spaces and times at the same time. Right? So it can carry out a number of operations in different spaces at the same time. Now, what on earth are they talking about? Where are these different spaces? Well, obviously, there are different technical ways of trying to explain this, but the point is that we've even got things. We do have, one of my friends has become a millionaire by inventing a quantum cryptography lock, which has been bought by all the banks because nobody can break it. It's an unbreakable code because it's not in this space at all, so nobody can find where it is. Right? You look around and it's not in space, so what can you do? Right? It's a one-time code that is totally unbreakable. Quantum cryptography. Now, it's a mysterious world. You've probably, well, I'm sure you've seen television films and big films which talk about quantum leaps, quantum jumps into other spaces and time. Well, that's not ridiculous. I mean, the programs are usually ridiculous, but the idea is not ridiculous. So that it is actually, people are dealing with what they call, some physicists call many worlds theory. Don't know if you've come across this. Many worlds theory is this, that electrons, which I'm talking about for some reason, electrons are not just things which have one location in space and a particular velocity at which they're moving. Electrons have a number of locations. They are superposed. There are a number of positions that they have. Or you can say they're at all those positions. They're fuzzy. They're in lots of different places. Or you could say there are lots of different spaces in which they exist. And the many worlds theory is that every possible space that an electron could be in, it is in. So there are many worlds. Put this in a picture form, and it's here I am standing here in this place, but I'm also standing in a slightly different position in another adjacent space. So I'm giving this talk in this space, but I'm giving a different talk in another space. Perhaps I'm an atheist in another space. That would be rather distressing. But we might exist in lots of different spaces. And the many worlds theory, which again, most of my physicist colleagues, quantum physicists anyway, in Oxford, accept, is that every possible world does exist. Now, why they believe this is a complicated question, but there are reasons why they believe it. It's to do with the nature of quantum physics and the fact that physics has passed beyond this space and time into worlds beyond space and time. Now, consciousness comes into this because these strange superposed particles, which exist in a number of different spaces, logically speaking, collapse into this space and time when they are observed. And that's how consciousness can come to seem very important in physics. I don't want to give the impression that all quantum physicists believe this. There are other interpretations, but a lot of Nobel Prize-winning top quantum physicists do believe this, and they think that without consciousness, there wouldn't be any physical world. There wouldn't be the world in which we live and move and have our being. So without consciousness, no world. Isn't that amazing? How could you be a materialist and say that? I mean, materialist is a person who says there isn't any consciousness. Daniel Dennett, who's the most extreme of all materialists, has written a book called Consciousness Explained, which most of us call, privately, Consciousness Explained Away. Because what he says is, consciousness is nothing but physical states of the brain. That's what it is. So instead of saying I'm conscious, I could say my brain is in state 423, and that's all there is to it. Francis Crick, one of the discoverers of the structure of DNA, of which there were 3, but nobody knows there were 3. Everybody knows there were 2, Crick and Watson, but I seem to be the only person who knows there were 3, because the third man was a friend of mine. Anyway, 3 people got the Nobel Prize. That's just by the way. So Crick wrote a book called The Astonishing Hypothesis, and in that book, Crick says, you, your feelings, your thoughts, your beliefs, all that you think about, you are nothing more than movements of neurons, electrons basically, in your brain. That's all you are. You're just electrons. You're just a whole bundle of electrons. Well, that is what is bound to be wrong. That is materialism. Consciousness is just the brain. But actually, what a lot of quantum physicists say is actually the brain is nothing but consciousness. Or without consciousness, we wouldn't ever even see or know or touch or feel a brain. And here's the biggest controversy, the biggest argument, the biggest philosophical argument about reality in the whole world today. Is consciousness the ultimate nature of reality, without which there wouldn't be any physical reality? Or is everything just made of physical bits bumping into one another, so consciousness is a sort of side effect which comes about by accident? Which of those views is true? Now, the new atheists say, well, the materialist view is true. I gave you that quotation from Richard Lewontin. We are bound to be materialists as scientists. What I'm saying is, that is as false. It's a lie. It's as false as any statement could be, because most of the best physicists in the world today do not believe that. First of all, they're not sure what matter is, so you can't be a materialist. It's some form of energy, but it could take many different forms. There are many space-times, and they're all different. And secondly, probably matter couldn't exist without some form of consciousness, in the sense in which we experience the material universe requires consciousness. So you're not going to have a material world without consciousness. That's the opposite of materialism. So that's the point I want to make at this stage, that actually science does not support materialism. State-of-the-art science, particularly in physics and mathematics, supports a view which transcends materialism, which makes consciousness very important, which makes the mathematical structure of the universe very important. In physics now, you can't imagine what's going on. I've been to the Large Hadron Collider in Geneva. It's a rather boring place to go because all you've got is a very long tube which goes around the Earth and nothing in it except some magnets which don't work, made in America. But when they get it working, it's going to be the biggest thing on Earth, and it will make subatomic particles go very, very fast and crash into one another. And some people think make a black hole down which we will all disappear. But anyway, so if it doesn't work, that's a good thing, basically. So in this Large Hadron Collider, what they're doing is they're looking for Higgs boson, which is misleadingly called the God particle. Maybe you've heard of the God particle. It is a Higgs boson. And some people think this has got something to do with religion. In fact, a colleague of mine, the Bishop of Oxford, was asked to go and give a talk at a literary festival on the God particle, because they thought a bishop is the person to ask about the God particle. Of course, Richard didn't have the slightest idea what the God particle was. Well, why is it called the God particle? The answer is it's called because Dr. Higgs, who thought of the idea, said, God knows what this is. That's why it's called the God particle. Anyway, they're going to be looking for it. But the point is, this particle, which is what makes gravity work on the whole, what gives things mass. Or it's not a particle, really. It's a wave, as I've explained to you. Particles are really waves, so they're not really particles. But they're looking for it, and it's a purely theoretical construction. Nobody's ever seen one. We don't know if there is one. We're going to look for one, but every experiment costs about $2 million, so we probably not have many experiments, not if it's funded by the UK anyway. So you're going to find it very difficult. What has happened is this. Science is no longer something which just looks, observes, and records what it sees. That's not science. That's old-fashioned stuff. What science does is invent hypotheses which are purely mathematical in form because they are beautiful. The quantum physicist from Cambridge, Paul Dirac, one of the greatest quantum physicists, was asked why he invented the fundamental equations of quantum mechanics. And he said, because I just thought of the most beautiful equations I could. To most of us, they don't make sense, but he found them to be beautiful. Beauty was the thing he thought of. Isaac Newton, that great scientist from England who really started modern science, said the same thing in his great work, Principia Mathematica, 1637, I think. He said, 1673, sorry. He said, the reason I thought of the laws of nature, the laws of gravity, the laws of mechanics, is because they were the most beautiful and simplest laws that would be made by an intelligent creator of the universe. And Isaac Newton was a very devout theist. Right? And his reason for inventing those laws were, he said, these are the laws an intelligent creator would devise to get the richest possible set of effects out of the simplest set of laws. So religion is not far away from good science when you get down to the ultimate questions about, is nature beautiful? Is it intelligible? Why should it be if it's just an accident by chance? But it might be if actually the creator of nature is a being who values beauty and intelligence, and who is itself complete beauty and intelligence. So that ideal, which is God, of course, is there at the root of science. Not all scientists have to believe it. They don't have to believe that this God has anything to do with what goes on in churches. They very often don't. Whether you go to church or not, that's a different matter. But if you're asking the question, is consciousness, is intelligence involved in the basic structure of the universe, most physicists would say probably yes. Albert Einstein said yes. Intelligence and consciousness is somehow involved in the structure of the universe. You remember one of his most famous reported sayings, God does not play dice with the universe. He was actually wrong about that. But what he meant by saying that was that the universe is so intelligible, is such a rational structure, that there can't be random events in it. Now, Einstein was almost certainly wrong about that because quantum physics has shown that there are random events, but only within limits. The random events are within very strictly controlled limits. And randomness, of course, allows creativity and freedom and change to occur, as well as the repetitiveness that nothing but law would allow. Now, it may sound as though this is a sort of elementary physics lecture, but it's not that at all. It's asking the question, does science commit you to materialism? And the new atheist's view is that it does, and that's why the new atheists believe in old-fashioned and obsolete science. If you talk about state-of-the-art physics, you're going to say, well, the whole thing is so mysterious that we couldn't make any dogmatic statement about it, but it looks as though consciousness is very important to the universe we live in and know about and talk about and see, and it looks as though the universe is intelligible. We invent things like the Higgs boson, the God particle, because we're looking for ultimate rationality and intelligibility and beauty, not because we've actually found one, but because this is the most elegant theory that would exist to explain why the universe is the way it is. So that commitment to rationality and beauty is a scientific commitment. The reason some scientists don't like talking about God is because they have a very primitive idea of God. And that's the next thing I'll talk about. So what I've said so far is that the best science believes in an intelligent and beautiful and supernatural right? Beyond space and time, origin for this universe. And I want to say that's actually the traditional Christian view of God. So the next thing I want to say is, why don't they see that? Why can't they see it? Why do they deride and parody belief in God? A.C. Grayling, who's a philosopher in Britain who sometimes ill-advisedly makes remarks about religion, talks about God in the same breath as talking about fairies. And he says, well, I don't believe in fairies, little things which paint the bluebells blue when we're not looking. And so I don't believe in a God who's the same sort of supernatural figment of the imagination who paints things when we're not looking, right? And that's a parody of any religious belief. It makes religion into something stupid. Of course, that's what... But why do they want to make religion into something stupid when it's actually been believed by the most intelligent people in the history of the world? What would make them do that? And it's hard to say what makes them do that, but it's due to a complete ignorance of what religion is. Let me take an example. Let's talk about, for a moment, the ancient Greek gods. We know they don't exist, so I'm safe in talking about them. All right, the ancient Greek gods, what were they? Well, the new atheists tend to say, well, the ancient Greek gods were allegedly scientific explanations. Here's science again, you see. They were scientific explanations of why things happened. So if the sun comes up in the morning, there's a goddess called Aurora, great big, huge, but invisible goddess, who drags up the sun and puts it in the sky. And that was an explanation. Why does the sun rise? Because some goddess is making it rise. And then they have no difficulty in showing that that explanation is unnecessary and stupid, right? And so they say, well, that's what religion is like. It's like having some invisible figure who makes things happen. And they say, well, Christians are just like that. They believe God is an intelligent being who's making things happen all the time. But we don't need that being. We've got laws of nature. Of course, the irony is it's the very laws of nature which point to the existence of an intelligent creator, but they don't see that. But they're wrong about the Greek gods and goddesses. Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, was never a scientific explanation. So at this point, I want to make a clear distinction between a scientific explanation and a religious perception of the universe. And I want to suggest this because we know there's such a distinction. People who come to church don't put on their lab coats and come with microscopes when they come to church and perform scientific experiments. People who pray don't pray as an experiment. Well, I jolly well hope they don't, to see whether it works, There would be something fishy if people, people have tried this, They prayed for one group and not for another group and see which group does better. But there's something wrong with that. There's something ethically obscure and spiritually obscurantist about such a procedure. Prayer isn't an experiment. It's precisely not that. To pray to God in that way is rather like experimenting on your wife and carrying out tests to see whether she loves you or not. And I think that would be offensive. Certainly I would take offense if my wife tried that on me. It's rather a matter of personal relationship. And personal relationships are not scientific experiments. There's something different about it. And what's different about it? Well, a scientific experiment treats things as objects. You've got them there. You can play around with them. You can alter them. You can take bits out, put bits in. You can control them. And you can put them in test situations. That's an objective attitude. But personal relationships are not like that. You have to be involved. If you have a real relationship with another person, you have to give yourself to them. You have to open up a little bit to them, and you hope that they're opening up to you, and you're not in an experimental situation. Perhaps there's a website somewhere which is a dating site where it says, carry out an experiment on somebody tonight and take her out to dinner and see what happens. But it's not really an experiment. And if you went into it in that frame of mind, well, you can guarantee what would happen. Nothing at all. So what's different about personal relationships? Well, one difference is you get involved with persons. You get emotionally involved. You see, physicists don't get emotionally involved with Higgs bosons. They don't say, I love you, Higgs boson, and then get offended when the Higgs boson doesn't respond. They don't do that. The Higgs boson is an object. But the fundamental thing about other persons is you must never treat them as objects. You must always treat them as persons who have their own views, who have their own passions, and who can interact with you and be changed by you, but change you in the process. So you're changed by other people. You're not changed by Higgs bosons. Okay? You can carry out as many scientific experiments as you'd like, and it won't change your emotional life at all. But you enter into a proper relationship with another person, and you will be changed. I notice I've been married for about 45 years now, and my wife and I often think the same thoughts. We certainly didn't do that when we started out. Now we do. It's got a bit strange, really, because we sometimes know what we're saying before we say it, and it gets a bit annoying in a sense, really. And she says, I know what you're going to say, and I have to think of something else instead. But people do sort of grow together and get changed by each other. Now, this is very important. Religion is about personal relationship. It's not about scientific, objective experimentation. But the new atheists try to make religion into something scientific and objective. So when they say believing in the gods or worshipping a god is actually explaining scientifically why the sun rises, they've got the whole thing completely wrong. It's like saying music exists to explain why violins play. Music doesn't exist for that reason at all. Music doesn't exist to explain anything. Music exists to reveal something to you, something of beauty, something of profundity, something you could really call transcendent, something that takes you out of yourself and shows you things you might never have thought. It's disclosive. It's changing. It changes you. Personal relationships are like that. But science is not like that. It's not. However wonderful science is, and I'm all for science, it doesn't do that to you. So the new atheists have got religion wrong. They're religion blind. It's like somebody, who is tone deaf talking about music. They wouldn't know what they were talking about. They wouldn't ever have had a musical experience. Right? And so when they talk about religion, they haven't got the slightest idea what they're talking about. They've never had a religious experience. They don't know what it would be to feel the sense of the presence of God. They have no idea of that. There's nothing that's ever touched them and changed their lives by its moral force and by its spiritual force. That sense of transcendence that might come in lots of different contexts.